So what I derive from this is that the market is balancing itself out a little bit, just a little bit. In today's video, we're going to go through the most expensive neighborhoods in downtown Toronto for condominiums. Also, we're going to go through weekly prices for North York, Toronto, and more in this edition of the weekly condo market update. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtron Realty. As always, you can find my contact information in the description box. Feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review if you happen to enjoy my video. And also feel free to get in touch via my contact info with any questions you may have regarding Toronto/GTA real estate market. I would be happy to help. For those who have DM'd me on Instagram or emailed me on via Gmail, I apologize if I haven't gotten back to you yet. I'm quite busy. I am working my way through all the emails and all the DMs. Anyways, let's get to the point of today's video, which is yet another weekly condo market episode 3, where I go through some major trends, or not so major trends, but some numbers that you should know with regards to the condo market, whether it's downtown. Most often we're going to be talking about downtown, but always we talk about Midtown, North York, Richmond Hill. Today's edition, we have a lot to go through. So let's start with specific neighborhood prices for downtown Toronto, namely the most expensive areas by specific neighborhood in downtown Toronto for condominiums as of April 25th, 2021. Now, the date of recording of this video is April 26th, but I actually created a video in the past going through downtown neighborhoods and the specific prices by neighborhood for condominiums way back in January or February. The exact date escapes my mind right now. So the prices we're going to be looking at for this edition of going through prices by specific neighborhood will be from the point of the previous video, which, once again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think was end of January, beginning of February, to April 25th. So we're looking at that duration of time with regards to condo prices. And these, as we will go through, are the most expensive. Coming in at number 5 is the Waterfront Communities C8. Now, this is to be differentiated from Waterfront Communities C1. If you take a look at the TREP maps, which there should be a link in the description, this is the Waterfront Communities, more so to the eastern side of the city. The average sold price was $815,000 and the median price was $745,000. In the time span we're looking at here, we actually saw a lot of migration from C1 waterfront to C8. And the same thing applies to Niagara region as well, which is west of C1 waterfront. And it might be easy to understand why. Because when there's a lot of competition in a central area such as C1 waterfront as opposed to C8 waterfront, which we're discussing now, the buyers tend to migrate to more immediate areas that are a little bit more affordable. And in this case, that's C8. So we definitely saw a shift of buyer demand from C1 to C8. However, that also led to prices in C8, namely C8 waterfront. That obviously led to prices there increasing as well. Obviously, there's less inventory in C8 waterfront, even though it is the waterfront. C1 portion of the waterfront has far more inventory than C8. Now, once again, maybe I'm assuming you know too much. If these letters are confusing, C8, C1, waterfront, C1, waterfront, C8, take a look at the TREP maps in the description box. I have a link to it there where you can see basically what areas these letters, these numbers, these communities, these neighborhoods designate. The fourth most expensive area in downtown Toronto for condominiums in 2021 so far, from the point of the last video, is Niagara region. And once again, it's easy to see why. As I said, when there's a lot of competition in a central area such as C1 waterfront, either people go east, the shift of buyers, at least the numbers say so, and my daily experience working with downtown Toronto condo buyers and sellers showed me this, that there was a shift of people going east, as I covered in the previous item on this list, and now west. However, the average price here is much higher. As you can see, it's at $845,000. Now, although I have historically been a little hard on Niagara in terms of the finishings, because there's a good amount of condominium projects in the Niagara region that I'm not the biggest fan of, and I think frankly are overrated. They're not bad. If you can find a good price unit in that building, definitely go for it, or those buildings. And I've been historically hard on Niagara for that reason. However, compared to the eastern counterpart, which is C1 Waterfront. As of right now, it is a bit better in terms of just amenities and pathways to walk, daily living, access to transportation. Ultimately, this is downtown. Anywhere, even the worst parts of downtown, you're gonna have really good access to transportation, but compared to relative to other areas of downtown. Furthermore, there are more scenic condominium projects in Niagara as opposed to C1 Waterfront, where there are scenic projects. But if you take a look at the condominiums that are closest to the waterfront and the proximity to the lake, you have much better lake views in Niagara as opposed to C8 Waterfront. Once again, I have to clarify, there is a lot of good lake views that can be found in C8 Waterfront. But on average, in terms of just the area, Niagara is a bit superior, although I have historically been hard on the finishings and the cheap builds that you can sometimes find in Niagara that you really can't find all that much in C8 Waterfront. Next up, coming in at $863,000, the third most expensive neighborhood in downtown Toronto for condominiums is Trinity Bellwoods. Now, Trinity Bellwoods is a special case here because there's not a lot of inventory, especially coming off of C8 Waterfront and now Niagara and the previous item on this list. Coming to Trinity Bellwoods, we see a drastic drop in sales any month you look at. If it's the summer market, if it's the winter market, doesn't matter. There's going to be always far less sales by sometimes a factor of over 100 as compared to Niagara region, C1 Waterfront, C8 Waterfront, because naturally the inventory is much lower and there isn't a lot of high rises. Trinity Bellwoods has a majority low to mid-rise condominium. And furthermore, Trinity Bellwoods is a very, very prestigious neighborhood. If you've ever been to Trinity Bellwoods, it's known for its parks. Also, it's, I would say, area in downtown Toronto, the southernmost area in downtown Toronto, where you can actually somewhat get a suburb-like feel. Obviously, the frontages for the detached and semi-detached properties are nowhere near as large as true suburbs such as Richmond Hill or even further north in North York. It historically has some of the most expensive detached, semi-detached freehold properties. It does feel like a suburb when you walk in the residential streets and go for walks in the park. As a result, there exists a positive reflection of that on the condominiums in this area. Funny enough though, as I've said in the past, Little Portugal, the specific neighborhood of Little Portugal, isn't that far removed from Trinity Bellwoods. And the same effect doesn't really occur with Little Portugal. There's various of different reasons, but one of the reasons is Little Portugal has horrible condominiums. And this shows you that the area just by itself is not enough. Let's move on to number 2. The second most expensive area in downtown Toronto is Palmerston Little Italy, which is very close in proximity to Trinity Bellwoods, and all the points I made applies to Little Italy area as well, coming in at $869,000. Now, in these areas, in these specific neighborhoods, we're talking about such low numbers of transactions and sales, even in this gap of time we're talking, right? If you recall in the beginning of the video, I said the duration of the prices we're looking at is picking up from the point of the previous video I made where I went through specific neighborhoods and specific prices, which was created and made around January, February, up to now, April. So that's, that's fair enough sample size. Even in the sample size, the difference is reflected in the price by a matter of $6,000. And if the one transaction went this way, another transaction went that way, which on individual cases, when you analyze transactions, there's sometimes, prices can seem a little off because the specific details about that transactions can really throw off the numbers. Sometimes realtors don't take commission. Sometimes builders are selling it. That's as a result, they're not giving commission. That's reflected in the prices. Sometimes, a buyer overpays for a property. Sometimes seller gets talked down more than they should. So if any of those transactions went one way or another, the gap between Trinity Bellwoods and Little Italy is not that much, as is reflected marginally by an increase of $6,000. And it could have been the other way around. And I would go further on to say that I think for appreciation purposes, Trinity Bellwoods is a much better area. Lastly, number 1, the most expensive area in downtown Toronto, or rather the most expensive neighborhood in downtown Toronto for condominiums midway to 2021 is the specific neighborhood of University. That stretch by St. George and Spadina is really, there's a lot of expensive 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom lofts to be found there. Much older as well, but older condominiums, I would say probably 7 times out of 10, or maybe even 8 times out of 10 nowadays. The age really can hurt the appreciation. And when I say old, I don't mean 10 to 15 years. I mean like 20 years, right? However, downtown and even in C1, certain places, the age, if it's a really well built condominium, really well maintained and really well located, it does add to the prestige of the condominium. Now, obviously, all those conditions have to be met. It has to be really well maintained and really well built initially when it was built. And the condominium corporation cannot be bankrupt or in debt, because obviously the older the condominium corporation is, the more likely there's debt. It's just natural. It's hard to accrue debt as a condominium corp when the condos only existed for a year. It's much simpler to accrue debt when the condos existed for 25 years. Okay, now let's move on to the weekly condo prices for downtown Toronto and North York very quickly. These are now prices from the 19th to 25th of April, just not to be confused. It's not the same duration as the previous portion of this video. If you watched it, we're looking at a sample size of 3 to 4 months there, right? Here we're just looking at 5 days, 5 to 6 days, right? So when we look at downtown Toronto, so we're only looking at C1, which takes into account all these neighborhoods we discussed, or most of them, with the exception of C8 Waterfront. We're talking about C1 Waterfront, Bayshore Corridor, University, Trinity, Bellwoods, Little Italy. So now we're looking at prices for the entire C1, not the specific neighborhoods anymore. Some marginal upwards movement in terms of bachelors. In the previous 2 editions, I kept reminding you how much of a bad investment bachelors can be. We're seeing some positive movement, but once again, these are weekly looks, right? So you can't derive too much, but on a weekly basis, week over week, the bachelors saw some minor improvement in median and average price, and even number of transactions, which is 3. However, when we look at all types, on average, week over week, prices were down $1,000. So last week, the average of all the transactions in downtown Toronto for C1 was around $812,000. This week it came in at $811,000. And the median price tells the true story in this case, where if we looked at the median for all transactions last week, the median stood at $698,000, and this week it's at $708,000. So what I derive from this is that the market is balancing itself out a little bit, just a little bit. Less properties are being put on the market for bidding wars. And if they are, it's no longer that much below asking. And once again, it is still somewhat of a seller's market, but it's becoming a little more balanced. The same type of, the world is ending frenzy that has been occurring is subsiding just a tiny bit. And the number of transactions dipped this week because the number of listings dipped as well. So supply slowed down just a bit as well. And lastly, sorry this video has been long enough, but let's move on to North York area, which for North York, I look at both C7 and C14. Obviously, once again, yes, this is not the entirety of North York. I understand that. This is central North York. C15 is North York as well. But just looking at C7 and C14, we see that average prices were higher when we look at all the types put together at 710 compared to last week. However, once again, average can sometimes be misleading, because if you have a couple of transactions on the upper end or lower end, they can really move the average quite a bit if you're not looking at that larger sample size. And clearly with North York, although it's very concentrated compared to, obviously other areas, when we're coming just from looking at downtown numbers, it may seem like a small sample size where there's only 38 transactions this week and there was only 35 to 38 transactions last week. Point being, the averages show an increase, but funny enough, when we look at the median prices, where the median for all types this week was $635 and last week was $645 rather. So once again, same thing. Things are holding steady. There's not a major shift one way or the other, because we're talking about marginal numbers here, right? If it was a drop or increase of 50K either way, or if there's bigger movement in any other category, then we can deduce something. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments or get in touch with me via my contact info in the description box. Lastly, feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. And as always, stay safe, and thank you for watching.